So what I got in the mail the second time around is a new nut and a new oil seal. However, this oil seal is too big for the metal housing to fit in this inner diameter. The first oil seal that I bought, and I've already installed it, fits correctly inside of here. In addition, this first oil seal was a very close fit to this nut, but it was a little tighter than what I wanted it to be. So Grant did put it on the lathe and took a few thousandths.
Yeah, like a 15
thousandths off of this shoulder here. And that made it a not quite so tight a fit inside that oil seal, and but still snug. So anyway, a new oil seal where none was before is now in. That's a win. And we have a what looks like actually a truer nut in the diagrams on the Buicks. I'll have to show you the old nut. The old nut actually went in like this. That shoulder, that skinny shoulder, was dented in so that it could not spin off underneath here. You can't see it. There's an indent on the shaft there where you can dent in and kind of like, not quite like a cotter pin, but in a way, make it so it cannot spin off of this shaft. But as you can see, it's missing entirely the shoulder that this nut has. And of course, there was zero seal on the inside of here also. So I'm not exactly sure how incredibly important it is. If you do have differential fluid leaking up into the torque tube, it's probably not great, but it also does not mean that your differential was necessarily ever running dry. It just seemed like you could probably keep putting more gear oil into it. Maybe it might not make it up to the bottom of that fill hole on the back side there as quickly or easily as what you want. But anyway, I think this is a better nut. It does make a seal in here, and I have gotten this knocked in here, and I like the way that fits. So that's what we're going to go with for getting this rear end back together. Hey, it's better than no oil seal at all. So it doesn't look like much, but quite a few things happened here where we actually rolled this entire axle assembly and pointed the strut ends against the wall so that we could apply as close as what we thought we could get to about 150 foot-pounds of torque on that nut, which means taking an adult that weighs like about 185 pounds or so and putting them on a wrench 12 foot out off of the nut, or 12 inches off of the nut, to the best of our estimations. I'm not that worried about it because the nut that I took off originally was loose on the spindle just slightly by finger pressure. The only thing keeping it from backing off was actually the indentation that I'm about to put on the nut right there into that groove. So we'll chisel that in, so make a nice big dent in it, and it won't be able to back off. All right, now we have dented in our nut. It's not going to go anywhere, and we have it nicely sealed in our differential. So by putting a hydraulic on one end to get the right height, we were actually able to pretty effortlessly drift this back onto the shaft. It doesn't show up very well, but I did put kind of a clear RTV silicone sealant around there. They recommended sealing those splines off of there a little bit. And then we're going to wind up putting this bottle jack right here and raising it on the underside of this drift pin that we got, knocked through there, and we'll peen one end over, and then we'll rotate it and peen the other end over, and the shaft will be connected. And I did remember to put my cork seal on here before I put all that together. I guess it's big enough if you did forget, you could probably run it down the whole propeller shaft and get back on there, but I think we're okay. So we flipped the torque tube on its tummy, and here at the back, I drilled a hole. It's an inspection hole is what it is. You can take that screw out, and if you want to see what fluid, if you think you're leaking fluid, you can remove that and it comes out. Hopefully after our work is done here, it'll be dry on the inside of this torque tube and we'll never need to look. But anyway, that's just a convenient little inspection hole that people have talked about putting on there, and I kind of like it. So we have the torque tube back onto the propeller shaft, which is great. We're moving along really well. And we got the little tab parts down here lined up okay. And it's really handy to have one of these guys around. Giant railroad spike. Thanks, Grandpa Steve, for helping us find something angry that you can use to line up stuff and wiggle it around, and then you can pass your bolts through. So, great tool to have. All right, and then we got them all buttoned back up. It did help to put this bottle jack underneath there to kind of help line up these holes a little bit, and a torque wrench to 35 to 40 foot-pounds of torque on each one of them. Just kind of loosen them up as you go, or uniformly tighten them. All right, so we've got those kind of strut rods or suspension pieces all buttoned up there, and those are all tightened down there with some new nuts and bolts. I think I'm going to try to vent this differential. Modern differentials are vented. They're not sealed like this one is. There is no vent that I can see to it. I believe that these bolts right there do carry all the way through into the housing. They talk about just like if you want to drain it, you can take the bottom bolt out and just kind of suck fluid out. So if that's the case, I've seen some aftermarket products where they'll take a bolt, make it hollow, drill a hole through it, put some type of a packing or something on the other end to keep stuff from getting down into it. I'm not exactly sure which direction I'm going to go, but I think I'm going to try to vent this case here. Something along those lines. So we'll see what I do. So I wound up just drilling a hole through that bolt there and tapping and threading in a piece of that soft brake line type material, and got it curled over there, so there's no way water is going to get into that, and it'll still oil and whatnot is not going to splash its way or come out of that. It's now vented, so that'll probably help in some way to keep oil from pushing past the both the pinion seal and maybe the axle seals as well. Like I said, it seems like every modern differential is vented just to allow for that type of expansion of fluids. I'm starting to drain some of the fluid out of that bottom bolt hole here, and it's kind of a strange mish of fluid there. I see kind of two different things going on there. Anyway, could be transmission fluid mixed with differential oil, water, who knows. Anyway, or new, not mixing with old. But anyway, we'll clean that up and drain the rest of it out. Alright, differential is drained, and we pretty much got this rear end put back together. I'll have to, I noticed there was a bad shaped gasket up front here sticking off the end. It was in pretty poor shape. So I'll have to make another gasket for that, and then we'll bleed the brakes. But I'd say this rear end's ready to go back into the car. So rear end of car has now been lifted up really high, just enough that I can get the wheels underneath the fender wells and clear the exhaust and all that good stuff. And now that I'm roughly in place, and the front of it is through the hole in the X members of the frame with the front of the torque tube, I'm going to lay the car back down onto jack stands. And then I'll wind up jacking up on the differential to actually raise the rear wheels and the differential up to be more in line with the torque tube, or I should say the shaft coming off the transmission, and hopefully it'll line up pretty good and we can just slide it in. So I'm underneath here, and I just had one of those moments where you're like, oh no, but then you realize, no, there's no other way to do this. So the torque ball, actually these, the torque tube itself here can't spin. So to get these bolts to line up eventually, you're going to have to put something on here, either by hand, twist it, yaw it around, wiggle it around, but eventually you have to actually twist the torque ball around until it will be able to line up with these bolts. I was pretty far off, so I guess if you're wanting to save yourself some time, the next time you go to put your torque ball back together, kind of put your bolts back in the vicinity. I was maybe a half a turn off. But anyway, we're back lined up, and it's not a big deal to get it lined back up again. And so now I'm going to move on to getting the seals put back on here, and I got to remember to put my gasket back in here too before I button everything up. But it's coming along, and I'll spend a little time trying to line up the torque tube propeller shaft here a little bit better with the ball. I'll put the differential up on a jack stand and be able to wheel it back and forth and kind of saw it back and forth, and eventually it'll be better lined up. I didn't really notice it before, but these torque tube bolts here, they're actually, two of them that came out are a different height, different length slightly than the others. Those two right there. I did notice that it is an unusual pattern in here. This is not a completely evenly spaced bolt pattern. When you put your torque tube back up, there's kind of 3 bigger ones on the bottom, 2 more, and then 1 on the top. I'll probably put the 3 longer ones down here, or and then another long one up here, and then 2 more up here at the top. It could be just because these are the bolts that they had when they were putting it together, or I'm not exactly sure what. Maybe when you're taking yours apart, you can take a little closer look than I had when you're taking them out. I think all of them, regardless, have enough length that it won't matter. And this is just to show a diagram of the proper order for stuff to go back onto that propeller shaft, which I'm about to clean off again real good. Just brush it off, make sure there's not dirt and debris in there. But it doesn't show the gasket, but there will be this gasket. There's already a retaining spring end on here. This kind of metal seal cap, and then the seal. And all that will smush up to the torque ball. They recommend you put that on now before you get too far ahead of yourself, which sounds like a good idea. Alright, so we've got our gasket, spring, cap, and then the seals over the spline there in the order. I went ahead and put the bolts up and got them ready to go now. So what I'll be doing is I'll have to stop filming for a while, but I'm going to drop the differential down so that it's can able to clear those springs a little better, just by a little bit. And I'll be yawing and moving and sliding this differential around on the jack, and probably coming back up to here and pulling on the torque ball tube and trying to line it up and see if we can't get this started. And if I can, I'll get the bolts just kind of started finger tight, but all connected a little bit there, and then start putting together some of the other bolts if I can on the chassis here loosely, just to kind of see how everything's going to line up. So I got pretty lucky under there. I was able to get one bolt kind of caught and started. I was actually able to get this pushed onto the propeller shaft, onto the transmission with one person. This is really probably much easier done as a 2-person job. I'm just anxious to get going right now. But anyway, so I'll be underneath here, and I'm gonna be moving this rear differential around a little bit to try to get the propeller shaft lined up. I'll probably even wind up raising it up against the springs because the springs are kind of in the way down there. I'll probably jack it up a little higher so that the angle isn't so extreme, and see if we can't get a better lineup on that torque tube on the propeller shaft and the torque ball. Alright, so now we're all hooked up again. We've got our suspension reconnected there to our shock absorbers. We're nice and tight with our springs, and our radius rod right here is hooked back up. That was a little bit of a booger, but got a screwdriver in there and wiggled it around, was able to get it to line up again. You have to raise the axle up and compress the springs a little bit to shorten up the distance on that radius rod to be able to get it in there. So now I'm going to wind up hooking up the brakes, probably hooking up the parking brake as well, bleeding the system because we got a lot of air in there. I know while I was laying around working on the interior, I pushed the gas pedal or brake pedal a few times, but anyway, once you've disconnected the brakes, you just got to bleed them again. So that's what we'll do next is brakes. So we've got her started up here and we've been running for a little while, and certainly not gushing fluids out anywhere or anything like that. So I think in a little bit here I'm going to start taking it for a few laps and see how the transmission fluid level is holding up. Oh, and I should probably show off the new wipers that I have here that seem to apparently work pretty good. So yay, we're doing it. Wiper motor was a success. So we're all back down on the road. We are no more jack stands or other things like that. The nothing was really leaking out from underneath the car, which is a good start. It did not, as it was just sitting there idling, and I did put it in drive and let the wheels just spin while it was up on jack stands. We didn't lose any transmission fluid there, although that's not a real test of it. It'll be when the torque ball gets flexed up and down and left and right and all that other stuff. That's when we'll know if we had some success. Or I may go ahead and take that, put a screw in the bottom of the torque tube there as a sight hole or a peephole or a fluid drain, so I could see what might be coming out of it if, in case I think I'm starting to lose transmission fluid. But anyway, let's not talk about that. Let's go for tomorrow when it's daytime and I've got more backup support around me, and we'll see if we can go put some miles on it tomorrow and find out if this transmission is going to hold fluid for us. Well, the rain's coming through today, but so I got to take the car out for a bit of a drive here this morning, and it's keeping its fluid. So I don't know, hold on, I'll put the camera down here for a second. You fill it up while it's running to low on the dipstick, and then at least of course if I'm reading my manual right here, while it's warmed up, after it's good and warm, that's when you take a reading off the dipstick. I don't know if it's showing on the show for you here or not, but anyway, that's I'll see if I can get her. Yeah, right up to the full, and then just a little bit more because I'd overfill it. So yeah, that's great. That sounds like a win right there. Seem to be driving around okay, at least in terms of transmission. And it needs to run a little bit better, a little bit smoother, but one piece at a time. So very good. I'll probably check out that little sight hole down there after a while that I made in the torque tube, see if any fluid seems to be coming out, and I'll check underneath the car to see if we got any drips or anything like that. But overall, that's a pretty good start for just kind of low idle, just rolling around the neighborhood. Never had a chance to take it on the highway or interstate, but we'll work on that when the weather improves a little bit here.